possible. I think you can advertise and things like that, but unless you're an established, well-known brand, it's really making those one-on-one connections with people.
G'day and welcome to the Farmers Vice podcast with your host, Jack Creswell. Whether you farm it, service it, or just love it, this podcast is for you. We'll bring you the techniques and technologies you can implement into your day straight from the leaders and innovators themselves. Spread the Farmers Vice so that we can reach more farmers right across Australia. Follow us on all of your socials at Farmers Vice, and let's get into this episode. Welcome back to the Farmers2Founders series, where we talk all things adoption within Agtech. And on this episode, we'll be talking about overcoming those adoption barriers for Agtech companies. And we will be joined by Matt Anderson, which is the manager of Agtech projects at Farmers2Founders, and Jen McKee, founders of Spades, policy and environmental consultant specialising in agricultural advice, and her experiences as an Agtech company. So let's get into this episode. Well, g'day and welcome to the Farmers Vice podcast. Great to have you in the studio, Jen and Matt, joining us back onto the Farmers2Founders series. Thank you for coming on board.
Thanks for having us.
Very nice to be here.
So the weather's pretty up and down, left, right. How is it with you, Jen, up in Queensland?
It is
probably nice and sunny.
Yeah, we're into some sunshine finally. It's been a pretty wet period of time, so we're enjoying the sun.
Absolutely, and hopefully a few more sunny days down south here as well, where we are. But let's get cracking into this episode. I think it's one of the most exciting things within agriculture, but also one of the most challenging, both from your side, coming from an Agtech company, but also as farmers out in the paddock, whether it's horticulture, into broadacre, or even livestock. Matt, for yourself, do you just want to give us a bit of playing field of what the landscape currently looks like within Agtech, that adoption sort of rate, and also are we at the middle of it or are we still at the very beginning?
Yeah, thanks, Jack. I mean, I think the overriding perspective of where we stand as an industry at the moment is really, really early on. We've made some fantastic, exciting advancements, and there's a lot of energy and excitement in the industry from the Agtech side of things more generally, but we're still at a really early stage, and other countries around the world and other industries are at a much more advanced stage than we are in Agtech in Australia, which is an important sort of consideration because the adoption piece, as you rightly say there, Jack, is a very exciting but challenging aspect to the industry at the moment. And it's causing some barriers and some difficulties for many early stage companies, which is sort of the bulk of where a lot of Agtech companies are at the moment. They're at that very early stage of growth and looking to scale their businesses and their solutions nationally and even internationally. And I think probably in many respects, we're at a little bit of an interesting sort of reflection point as an industry in terms of the formal language of the Agtech sector. It's been around for a handful of years now, and it's made some exciting progressions, as mentioned, but there is a challenge at the moment in trying to expand more broadly. There's a little bit of fatigue from some of those early adopters, producers we're hearing from about that sort of constant discussion around Agtech and innovation, and people are starting to sort of take stock a little bit of what it really means to adopt technologies and take them on board. And so there are some really pronounced challenges, and it was really interesting to hear in our last episode chatting with Tom Hampton, who's obviously a very innovative producer himself, but he ended up going out and setting up his own LoRaWAN network and sensory network simply because he was frustrated with what sort of solutions were out there and how they applied to his business and some of those critical adoption challenges. So we're in an interesting stage, and it's sort of quite a critical moment, I suppose, for many early stage Agtech companies to try and address some of these problems in adoption that's present at the moment.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's probably quite a personal journey for each farmer as well, us as farmers, and maybe it's just not the right time to get it in today, tomorrow. And maybe that's the time that they've sort of pampered the farmer to get them on board, get them across that line. But then just sort of, it's not a dead lead from the Agtech company side of it. It's just that farmer's journey isn't quite there yet. You need to sort of establish yourself and get your grips, your research into it, I suppose. Jen, do you just want to touch on coming in from the Agtech company side, from your startup there at Spades, and what have you sort of experienced?
With barriers?
Yeah, with the barriers coming in, just sort of what you've seen quite generally and broad especially within your area?
Like Matt just touched on, what I'm seeing is people manage their farms in such a variety of ways that one solution isn't going to suit everybody. And so it's just they're, trying to find what's going to fit their farm. And of course, that takes time as well to commit to even trialing a product or an innovation on their farm, as well as the cost, of course. Knowing who to trust, who's going to be around in 10, 20 years' time. They don't want to adopt something if it's, going to fold as a business. There's such, depending on who the farmer is and what they're growing or producing, it really can change what the barriers of adoption are to them.
Yeah, I think if you copy pasted a farm and put it in a different area, you would come up with different answers, different problems. Even though you run it the exact same management going across there as well, just how different it really can be. Do you think, from your standpoint, that the industry or farmers, agtech companies, that adoption phase is moving a bit too slow for what we sort of need to lift that benchmark up or to improve our goal?
I think we just need to give them flexible solutions. So not so much a one size fits all, but give them solutions that they can tailor to their own management style or how, their location or their, how their farm enterprise is set up. Yeah.
What have you experienced in terms of like timeframes of adoption? Talking about that slow point, should we just sort of remove the time frame at all? And maybe that person, as I said before, is not quite right. So you've got 48 months rather than time pressures of what an ag company, you obviously need funding, and the funding comes through these clients. But driving that experience is going to be more better off for that farmer to have that friendly, positive relationship as well with the ag tech that they're going to be using on their farm to just remove these timeframes. How has that worked for you?
Yeah, I know I'm in for the slow burn. Like I'm prepared to stick it out, and I'm lucky in that way. I'm bootstrapped for my business, so I don't have funding or investors to deal with, which has its positives and negatives. But I genuinely believe in what my solution is providing better outcomes for growers, and so I'm prepared to see it through. I don't think I could put a time frame on myself.
Yeah.
I think if we were doing that, then maybe you haven't got it right to start with from a business perspective as well as your solution.
Yeah, it's probably all well and good to put your KPIs in as a company going forward, and then you step into the paddock and you've had to flip around, turn left and right just to see how everything's sort of working for that farm. And as you said before, no farm's really the same, and getting that ag tech solution to work for them as well.
That's right. Yeah.
So what are we doing right currently, and what aren't we? The broader sort of spectrum. Matt, you might want to churn into this one as well, just to see what companies are doing currently. Is it working? Is it not currently working? And what are the possibilities moving forward?
Yeah, look, I think Jen's just touched on a really interesting point that's often not as commonly spoken about in tech circles more generally, and certainly in ag tech. There's a real emphasis in an industry like technology, and particularly a very early stage industry, to grow and scale quickly and reach those big investment figures and the turnaround figures and the 10x and the 30x and beyond that sort of language. And in reality, as Jen's touching on there, in the agriculture industry, the technologies which are going to be around in longer term and that are going to be more successful in terms of the impact that they're creating for the industry are those that are going to be really listening to what their customers, in all essence, the farmers, are trying to get out of it. And I think I've had a range of conversations with a few other ag tech companies who are taking that very slow perspective intentionally, because they're not driving a really high sales and marketing function. They're not really pushing themselves in the face of farmers. What they're doing is taking an organic approach, a word of mouth approach, allowing themselves to establish the relationship that you're talking about, Jack, and really listen to what their customers are asking for. Now, it's a slower process, and it probably does mean things are a bit tighter financially, and there are harder metrics to try and scale, I suppose. But it does mean that you are creating a solution and building a business that is really responding to the needs of farmers. It doesn't work for everyone. It is a hard game to play that, and sometimes there are companies that and tech solutions that move at the right time, and they can achieve that scale while still maintaining that very close relationship. But I think there's a real lesson there, and that is that a lot of our customers, a lot of industry participants, and a lot of farmers in Australia are people who are needing to have unique solutions, bespoke solutions that are addressing their very particular circumstances. No two farms are the same, and that's a reality that I think a lot of more successful ag tech companies are taking into their development and their growth.
Absolutely. I think Australia is quite unique, probably in the landscape of terms of bringing on ag tech. In America, you've got a lot larger amount of farmers across Europe. If you send out a Facebook ad for your ag tech, you probably hit some numbers. But here we're so vast, and here, there, and everywhere, when there's probably 10 people in a million square acres in some avenues of that. So finding your sort of channels and growing that relationship, and probably getting your foundations, Jen, setting them and alongside your goals as well as a company, obviously, to grow. But for the grand goals of what agriculture is trying to hit, that $100 billion mark, I think it's by 2030, isn't it, that we're trying to get to that? We ticked over 70 billion the other day, so we've got 30 billion to go in less than 8 years. So how that plays out, do you actually agree that we won't be able to get there without the use of ag tech playing on farms? What do you think, Jen?
I think it's critical. I think it's the way of the world. Everything's you've got to work smarter, not harder. And you've got to look for either making more money or saving money. So and technology can provide those solutions, whether it's improving your productivity, new way to fertigate or whatever it might be, or save you time. So I definitely think ag tech's got a critical role to play. Yes.
I think there's a lot of ag tech out there that looks to save time, money, and everything. But what sort of ag tech out there is looking to grow that money, or even off the back of saving time and money? How will that sort of project into this 100 billion sort of goal? Are we looking to expand on those farms? Is that the sort of avenues we think are going on? Maybe Matt, you might have broader experience, or Jen?
Look, from my perspective, absolutely. I completely agree with what Jen's saying in that technology is a vital way in which we can try to achieve these, and they are lofty goals that we've set as an industry, and that ability to improve optimizations, input or reduce inputs, operational efficiency, supply chain efficiencies, all those things are not only potentially improved by technology, but also really critical to improve. We've seen all those sort of challenges play out in recent months and recent years around global pressures and environmental pressures and all those things that are increasingly becoming a challenge. But I think also that it's not really about an ag tech solution in isolation. It's an industry. It's a growing and developing process where you may well have one solution that can integrate with another solution and create a smart farm or a smarter farm, or a range of different data sources that are coming together, which is obviously a big topic of conversation at the moment, is that integration of data. So really the way I see us reaching those sort of lofty goals is that we get better integration and better technologies that can work together to create a much more aligned or streamlined or productive or profitable farming system using those technology integrations.
Yeah, I think it will go a long way into helping us, and hopefully we can crack that 100 billion even before and have to reset that figure. This episode is brought to you by Farmers2Founders. If you've got an idea for a new business, ag tech solution, or value-added food product, Farmers2Founders can help you turn it into reality. No matter what stage you're at, their programs will support you to develop your business skills, access expert mentors, and tap into an extensive network of potential customers. Head to farmers2founders.com, that's with a number 2, to check out how you can get involved, or drop them an email for a yarn. Jen, for yourself, what sort of challenges and barriers have you come up against in establishing ag tech company and that adoption? What sort of barriers for probably yourself and also the farmers have you noticed?
For myself, it's just something I didn't anticipate I would be doing, so I wasn't really prepared to start an ag tech business. Yeah. I went looking for a solution that didn't exist yet, and then basically Googled how much does it cost to build an app, and off I went. So the barriers for myself have been learning how I go. So that is from a business perspective as well as from a farming perspective. I don't have a farming background. I mean, I have dealt with farmers a lot in my career, but really working with them to understand what their needs are and how an Agtech solution could help them. And from a business perspective, it's getting out as much as possible. I think you can advertise and things like that, but unless you're an established, well-known brand, it's really making those one-on-one connections with people. So I try to travel around as much as possible. I'll sign up to anything. I'll just to meet people, understand what their problems are, and not really like I'm terrible at the hard sell, but it's just, hey, I'm here if you need me, basically. So trying to get better as a business, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you go to an event, Jen, what happens? What sort of questions are the farmers asking? They pick up a pamphlet or something. What sort of questions are they asking at that sort of initial stage without even knowing you?
Well, we always start off having a good old complaint about regulation and the duplication and record keeping and just how onerous it is on them. That's always a good starting point. And then they know all the questions to ask because everybody does have the same issues with it all. They want something that's all in one place. What does it look like from an entry point of view? So you're out in the paddock, what do I do? Right the way through to managing those records and then at audit time. So they're asking, what are all the features of the program and, that sort of thing. Pretty simple stuff that I hope I can provide them with answers for. Yeah.
And obviously you sort of have your target audience, the farmers, but dialing down on that, what's the audience that is most receptive at these events? Is it farmers themselves? They're kids that have come back on farm, they may be mid-20s, early 20s or 30s?
No, we've got a pretty broad spectrum of ages as well as farm sizes. And I initially had built the platform for horticulture, but now we're getting feedlot enterprises using it, cotton, grains, livestock, beef cattle. So yeah, a pretty good variety of people, but mainly, like I hate to say it, but it's the wives usually that are in charge of the audits and the record keeping and all the paperwork stuff. So
yeah, I said in a previous episode before, what farms actually sort of need is an Agtech officer, one to take sort of charge and take the lead on it. We can't always do it, but for those husband and wife teams, maybe the wife is well positioned to take that Agtech officer role and sort of implement or even do the research off the back of that. There might be an important place on farm just to see. If we were at larger companies, we would hire someone specifically for that role, but as farmers, we can't always do that. I think it's important to have someone that actually is looking for these key updates that could improve them, to improve their auditing and everything like that, what you're doing as well.
That's a great idea, having an Agtech consultant. Like that perhaps in the future that'll be a career for somebody, to travel around and have a look at business enterprises and make recommendations for Agtech. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, it's an exciting space to see where it's going to go from here. But for the farmer side of it, do you think farmers are coming off a little bit hesitant diving into the market? Maybe from your experience at events, people are sort of trying to divert from the Agtech tent until they're actually ready. How's that worked?
Yeah, I think there needs to be an element of time set aside to, prepare themselves and their day-to-day activities for implementing this stuff. So our feedback's always great. Everybody thinks it's a great idea, but it's just a matter of them having the time to commit to doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Time and money, do you see that money plays a part in it? Say this piece of Agtech's $5,000, just looking at that as a figure, but also trying to showcase what value that is to the farmers. but really you don't know until it's on that farm. As farms ourselves, our family farm, we don't know anything until it's working on our place. It's great to see it at neighbours and everything, but it's also great to have it on farm, see it working in real life, hands on.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Every dollar counts, doesn't it? So and from my perspective, it's knowing where that value is. So how much I charge, they've got to get value out of that. And I hope we've sort of nailed that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think right through like the last 5 years that I've sort of been abrupt with what's going on with Agtech just to see what's coming into the space. A lot of the onus has probably been put on us farmers to uptake this information, and there has been not physical yelling, but yelling down the throats of farmers online, through groups, at events, just sort of pushing that ag tech maybe in the wrong area to the wrong target audience. Do you think there's a room for improvement from the ag tech company side, especially from startups to the larger companies as well?
Yeah, I think so, because we need to recognize that it's not going to be for everybody. And we can't blatantly say that, yes, this is going to work for you. I think there's got to be that, you've got to have a conversation with them rather than just a one-way messaging. You've got to have a conversation with the farmers to understand what their needs are before you can actually recommend it.
Yeah, I think jumping into this journey, we're all learning. What have you learned? And I suppose, have you pivoted from what you first thought was the sort of best case scenario, and now that you've pivoted, what was that? And what was you learning from that?
Well, it's been interesting to see how it's been applied in different agricultural commodities.
Yeah.
Pivoting, it's been interesting to release the MVP, the minimal viable product. So once I had my MVP released and started onboarding paying customers, just really listening to that feedback and implementing what they told me they needed in the platform, that was really important. Yeah.
100%. And as farmers, we love to learn from other farmers. Have you been able to get some solid case studies out there for others out there to read up upon, that peer-to-peer or F-to-F farmer-to-farmer learning? How's that work?
That will be something we're working on next. And we've got the Australian Agritech Association, which is our peak industry body, and this is something that they're working on. And that's another great tool or recommendation that farmers can look at to think about implementing these Agtech products.
Absolutely. So, Matt, maybe you want to answer this one. What's actually the chance of increasing this higher adoption rate? And actually, how is Farmers2Founders sort of getting around this to involve the farmers and ag tech companies to actually have both their say and sort of come together and meet in the middle for that successful relationship of the ag tech's actually working on farm?
Yeah, look, I think the chance of is really high, and there seems to be a bit of a shifting conversation to looking at exactly the attitude that Jen's approaching there, about looking really, really closely, establishing those relationships with producers, listening and hearing the feedback, and establishing a bit of a feedback loop so you can continually just sort of iterate what you're doing based on the information you're hearing and the responses you're hearing. There was a really interesting comment you made a bit earlier, Jen, about sort of very humbly laughing off how you started the business by doing a bit of a Google search and heading down the pathway with that. But really what you sort of overlooked a little bit was the work that you'd done and the experience that you'd had in the industry, which led you towards jumping into starting Spades. And I think that's a really important part for companies that are starting to build or who are at very early stages. What they're doing is actually really going back and understanding what the problem is that you're trying to solve. I mean, Jack, we've chatted about this before in previous episodes as well, but the better solution providers, ag tech companies that are solving problems, are better off in the long run, because they have a much more easily translatable value to the farmers. They can clearly say, look, this is the problem that we're solving with our solution. This is what it'll cost you. This is the benefit you'll get out of it. And then it really makes for a much more easily integratable solution into a business. So one of the really key things that we try to establish in our pathways and the process where we work with entrepreneurs to build their solutions is to go back and have those conversations, to pick up the phone, get down to the pub, whatever it might be, and have those very direct conversations with producers to say, what is it that's actually the key problem that you're facing, and how can we go about solving that? And Jen's done that very brilliantly in the work you do with Spades. But so too for those existing companies that are out there, and there are many of them, and they're sort of commercial ready. They've got some traction already in the market, and they may be reaching a bit of a struggling point with adoption or scaling. What we're doing in that space through our Tech Farm initiative is really trying to support them to listen again to the industry. I think one of the challenges, or one of the difficulties, is that a lot of solution providers out there actually haven't spent a lot of time on farm. And now that's not a requirement. You don't need to have spent time on farm to build a great ag tech business, but knowing about those practical challenges of a hardware device in a farming location, a software solution on a poor connected farming enterprise in a remote place, all these kind of very practical realities of how technology does or doesn't work on farming operations around Australia are really critical conversations we need to have. And so for those existing companies that are out there that are struggling a little bit, we try to refine that conversation so that they can really understand how they integrate in many farming businesses around Australia. But also to touch on what you said a bit earlier, Jack, that in reality, a lot of ag tech conversations need to be really individualized. They need to be really personalized to who you're chatting to. We face that in our family farming business, relevant difficulties that we have related to where we're located and our farming country and the big range line that runs through our property and things like that. They create very unique circumstances that make adopting technology on our property really difficult. So it's not simply about a case of sending a flyer in the mail and saying, here, this is a great product for you. Come buy it. It's about actually, picking up the phone, having the conversation, or really trying to understand the personal drivers for those individual farmers. And that's what we've done in Tech Farm to facilitate that conversation and try to overcome some of those adoption barriers.
Yeah, I think from my point of view, everyone's sort of cutting their teeth in. We're sort of past the mark of knowing about these devices, about cockies, where they're going to chew the leads at and everything. Everyone's sort of got that foundation quite right, and onto this relationship building and actually showcasing the true journey of what the value can be, and also the lifetime value of that. Not just saying I'm going to save $3,000 a year on my bore runs this year, or if I get audited, I'll have all my papers ready there to go. As a farmer, we want to reduce our paper. Sometimes, anyway, the notebook has seen better days, and we're going a little bit more digital and how that will work. I think the chance for higher uptake of ag tech it's inevitable, really, for farmers out there. I think we just need these really solid pieces of these farmers. We do need those early adopters out there to take lead of that, probably that ag tech officer on farm that's more inclined to get into this sort of ag tech. But Jen, for yourself, and the next 5 years, what are you most excited about this adoption rate? Not really the adoption rate, but working on the relationship with farmers and just getting your case out there as your own startup founder.
Just traveling around, looking for partnership opportunities, expanding the platform to other commodities, maybe launching in New Zealand or overseas. More future improvements for how people can manage their records. Yeah, I think it's just the beginning, and it's an exciting future because, everything's evolving, technology is evolving, and just keeping up, with the pace of that.
That's probably an important one we might have missed in the conversation just before, but you talked about collaborations and how that may take place within yourself with Spades and other ag tech out there, dashboards and everything. How do you see collaborating within ag tech and taking down those sort of competitive barriers, I suppose, and being in line with each other?
Yeah, I've spoken to very similar solution providers. I mean, nobody seems to be exactly the same, and there's always going to be that crossover with some things. I mean, that's the nature of it. So collaboration, as you said, these dashboards that can integrate or tech stack with technology, partnership opportunities with people who are, for my case, the governments and regulators that set these standards. I'm providing a tool for their customers to comply with their standards. So that would be great to partner with them, or any other enterprises or businesses that are keen to help me, achieve the things I want to achieve.
Yeah, so I think that's probably a great way to play it. When I do these episodes talking about ag tech, how it really helps farmers driving down, I have the trouble of splitting the 2 episodes of how it helps farmers, but also that journey of building your own ag tech as a startup founder. But luckily for this episode, we'll get stuck into it and we'll just get a bit of a glimpse, Jen, into your background. How did it all start out into the agriculture industry?
Okay, I grew up and I still live in Innisfail in North Queensland. So it's a farming community, lots of bananas, sugarcane. I'm not from a farming family. However, I went to uni and did environmental science. On uni holidays, I packed bananas, that sort of thing. I got a job when I graduated in state government doing natural resource management. So the nature of that was working with farmers. I also did some biosecurity policy, and I did about 13 years of state government public service, and I was looking for something new to do. And a friend of mine who was a farmer, she mentioned that I could help growers with their audit requirements and environmental management plans, things like that. So yeah, that was the sort of base of my previous career. And while I was out doing some work, a lot of growers were telling me what their problems were with the duplication of record keeping and the paperwork that they have to do and the hours that they're spending every week and weeks at a time preparing for audit. So I thought there would be a digital solution for them existing, and there wasn't. So I basically Googled, how to build an app. Yeah. Which I didn't do, just to be clear. I'm not a software developer. I commissioned that to be done. So yeah.
Don't worry, I've done that before as well. But for yourself, what got you across the line to get into it? Maybe looking it up on Google, or did you have that one sort of case study, your friend that was a farmer, that you could sort of, hey, does this work? Are you looking for this? What?
Yeah, I spoke in those early days, while it was still just an idea. I spoke to a lot of farmers, and the more I spoke to them, they really sort of cheered me on, said, yeah, this is a great idea. This is definitely needed. And so, yeah, the more I built it out of, what is needed from an sort of data or record input point of view, those features along the way for managing records and non-compliances, documentation, things like that, right to the audit perspective. Yeah, it's been a really great journey. Yeah.
Absolutely. And when did you actually start this journey, Jen?
About 2 years ago.
So you've come leaps, bounds, and spades from where you were 2 years ago.
Yeah, resigned from my job.
And on that job, probably through your exposure to, was it 13 years in public service, dealing with regulations, policies, what sort of information, knowledge do you think you brought across through your ag tech startup, but also to the wider community of what agriculture is?
Just an understanding of what their legislative requirements are, being able to look at where that duplication of those requirements is, and making sure that I've built into my platform that somebody only needs to demonstrate their compliance once, and then from the end point, they select what they need to be audited for, and it goes and retrieves that information. So, and also just an understanding of their, a farm's basic needs. They don't want, a lot of them don't want bells and whistles. They just want something very simple.
And how's that played out in probably the user face, your product, reiterating your product as well, changing it around a little bit? How's that worked on the farmer side of it, and working that working relationship, I suppose, with yourself?
Yeah, it's great. I love talking to farmers, and they're always full of ideas. For me, it's knowing what to implement into the platform and what not to, because of course everybody manages things differently. I can't satisfy everybody's needs. Yeah.
What about compliance and regulations? Do you think farmers are up with the latest updates, I suppose, for what they need to be compliant with, depending what sort of sector industry they're coming from? I suppose farmers may leave this to the back end of it. We don't enjoy the office. It's no everyone knows that farmers aren't office savvy, not savvy, but we don't enjoy the time in there. How do you think this plays out for yourself?
Yeah, it's a lot to keep on top of. Like, this is, you know, to be across all policy, regulations, new standards, you know, workplace health and safety, food safety, biosecurity requirements, market access. It's a lot. Like, I really am impressed with how farmers have to grow produce or, you know, food, run a business, have employees, and be on top of all these regulation requirements. So I hope that what I can do as part of the service of this subscription platform is making sure that the records that they keep are satisfying, you know, changing and updated regulations.
Yeah, I suppose, like you said before, once you initially get that done, and if it is digitally, it's ongoing, and you can just go back through and update it. It's not paper-based, and you're going to be further ahead and prepared if you are going to be audited. And being audited is probably a big thing for farmers, especially within horticulture, a little bit closer to consumers as well.
Yeah, definitely is. It can take them a few weeks to get their paperwork ready. Yeah, and an audit can take days. So yeah,
absolutely. So for yourself and your product at Spades, what challenges have you encountered along the way with your product leading towards adoption of it?
Okay. Well, every farm's got different ways of managing things. I'm hoping to keep the platform as simple as possible and flexible as possible as well, so that they can manage things the way they want. We've mentioned before, everybody, you know, it's not going to suit everybody, and that's fine. Just giving them the basic features of what they need in a farm office.
So you spoke about minimal viable product before, MVP. Can you actually, for those that may not know what that means, can you touch on that and what that meant for you and your product?
Okay, so time and money is limited, isn't it, for everybody? So it was just determining what the basic minimum features and how it interacts and flows with each other for a working platform that has value, and releasing that to people to trial, basically, to ensure that it works for them, and then getting that feedback and improving the platform from there, rather than waiting until you've got this, you know, polished, perfect Agtech product that, you know, will never be ready to be released, because you will never reach that level of perfection. You need to get it out there into the world, get people using it in the real world, and getting that feedback and implementing improvements.
Yeah, nothing's perfect. And what I've seen in ag, farmers are more than welcome to give the Agtech some direction in what sort of feedback solutions they're looking for, or what that simple little tweak that you glance through it every day, but you wouldn't be able to get it unless you were that farmer at that time of day as well. But for yourself, how have you overcome the challenges of adoption within your Agtech space?
Just keeping things simple, not adopting all the suggested features, having a high level of customer support. So depending on the business, they might need a lot of interaction and training and things like that, whereas we've had other people who sign up and they refuse, you know, they don't need training, it's pretty basic. And just listening and welcoming feedback and criticism.
I think that's probably a poignant one, is taking on the criticism and turning it around for that farmer. And I think if you do that, you'll be able to have a long-term relationship, quite vital. What sort of channels for yourself have worked in attracting different areas of farmers going forth?
Yeah, word of mouth is always the best one. Getting out to grower events. So if there's the Hawk Connections in Brisbane was great. Talking to industry bodies, people like Matt, just getting the word out there rather than that direct marketing. It's more about, forming those connections with people in the industry and, having, word spread a bit, naturally.
Yeah. And moving into it, you spoke about you were bootstrapped with your company and probably the appeal of moving super quick, getting all these farmers on board. Do you think you've been sort of exposed or pressured in the way of you have to be a 100-person company by the end of 2030? You have to have so much in your bank moving along as an Agtech founder, or have you actually enjoyed the slower approach? What has your approach been to all of this?
I mean, it's important to have goals. Yep. So I'm definitely working towards certain milestones to hit. But it's been interesting. Like you can be so sure of your solution and everybody's going to love this and why wouldn't they adopt it? But then when you are actually in the game and talking to growers, and even if they do love it and it's perfect for them, they might not have the time to commit to it, or they'll wait till the next audit round is due or something like that. There's always going to be hurdles depending on the person. So it's been interesting to see it be a little bit slower than I anticipated, just because I was a little bit naive and had a little bit too much confidence in my product. So it's humbling, but I'm still confident in what I'm providing, and I'm, here to see it through to success.
100%. And also looking towards your own scalability, whether that's a sustainable one or you get some quick investment in as an Agtech startup founder. Just like farms, no Agtech's the same. You're sort of doing different avenues with a slight overlap in some areas as well. But what's your approach been to scaling Spades out and getting that growth in? Like for the next 5 to 10 years, how do you see that playing a role?
Yeah, so I initially built the platform for horticulture, for fresh produce, and very quickly we onboarded other commodities. So it's now looking at ensuring it's an all of agriculture compliance management platform, and which we're well on our way to doing. We are also looking to launch overseas by the end of or the beginning of next year. So looking at regulation requirements in New Zealand, that will be the most logical choice because we have very similar food standards.
Yep.
Employing people in regional areas, that's a big goal for me. I'd really like to have customer support in the main food production areas around the country. Just see where things take us.
Yeah, I think it's a very similar story, not the Agtech itself, but how Agtech is looking to bolster these regional communities, and it really is playing a solid role within Australian agriculture, but also the regional community of where they are and where you are there in Innisfail. But for yourself, as an Agtech founder, do you think the statement of solutions looking to find the problems rings true for too many others out there? They've got the solution and they're looking to find that farmer's problem and just sort of plug that hole with it's a square peg going into a round hole.
Yeah, I mean, that's going to happen in every industry. People will look for market opportunities.
Yeah. So
I know some really good software platforms or Agtech that their founders are software developers.
Yeah.
And they've seen an opportunity to, make a living. But you've got to have that good understanding of the farmer's perspective. Like you do, like no matter what your background is, what your qualifications are, you need to spend time with the growers and producers to understand their needs. Otherwise, it's not going to work.
Yeah, definitely. And when you were growing Spades, what sort of problems were you aware of initially, maybe through that friend of a farmer? the farmer that was a friend, I mean.
Yeah. So, just their frustrations and
Coming back to
their lack.
compliance, keeping up to
That's
date,
right. Yeah.
getting
Yeah.
their bookwork in order.
Yeah, it was a lot. And when I saw the amount of paper they go through, and when COVID came on board and they had to keep records for that, like it is insane. Some farm businesses, the amount of records they've got to keep.
And when you look at these ag tech, you sort of need to look at them as half an employee, quarter of an employee, filling a role, keeping you up to date. And with compliance, where we are going, consumers are wanting more, but we're going to be having to showcase our compliance as well, especially when food's going to that consumer in the back end.
That's right. Yeah.
And as Spades is early, but really an exciting phase of growth for yourself, what are your aims to grow the business within 6 to 12 months? What are you most excited about? I think 2023 will be quite a big year for agriculture off the back of the environment, climatical sort of outcomes we've had, quite wet and good for the ground.
Yeah, in the next 6 months. So 6 months ago, I was lucky enough to receive a government grant. So in the next 6 months, I'll be completing the requirements for that. So that's finishing off our rebrand. We were previously called Grower Support, and now we're Spades. I'm planning a lot of travel around the country, expanding the platform to other commodities, feature improvements. Looking for those partnership opportunities and connecting with other ag tech providers and, industry bodies.
I think let's round it off with one piece of farms advice that you'd like to pass on to a budding ag tech startup or one that's already established. What would you first say to them about getting that adoption right for that mix of adoption for the farmer and yourself? What would you say?
Listening is key. Listen to their problems, take the time to understand their perspective of what their frustrations are, and give them as much support or as little support as they need, because every farm business is so different.
Do you think like literally getting on the phone to them and listening to them talk that way, or getting out there into the paddock? What sort of worked for you?
I mean, in person is always better, but on the phone, we've all learnt to cope over the last few years. So digital is fine.
Absolutely. Well, I think for this episode, it's been unreal to see your transparency in growing an ag tech startup. I think it's amazing what you've done, but also the way you've done it and where it's going for Australian agriculture. Regulatory and also compliance is huge within farming. And also, Matt, do you want to round it off just about that adoption within ag tech and Australian agriculture? Where do you think it's going? Let's go a bit further afield, down to 5 years. Where do you hope it to be?
Yeah, look, I mean, I'll just say in closing as well, just to respond to what you were saying there before a bit, Jack, that it's actually really refreshing to hear you speak as you do, Jen, about your approach and your transparency and the sort of steps that you've taken. You'd be surprised how many ag tech companies that I chat to that really haven't taken some of those really critical steps that you have to really understand your customer and the farmer and the.
Because I don't know what I'm doing.
Well, no, it's really good practice, and I think it's set you up really well with the amazing amount of growth you've had in the last 2 years with grower services with Spades, and also now going forward, it's a fantastic time for you, and I think you're heading in a really fantastic direction. And what's something that really stood out for me there as well is that I mean, a lot of ag tech founders, be it whether they're tech developers or farmers or students, researchers, whoever they may be, are often really tired and passionate about the solution they're building, which is a fantastic thing to have. But you need to be really, really willing to hear the feedback and make some changes, and sometimes cut out that feature that you thought was the game-changing bit, or make those little changes because you're hearing it constantly back from your audiences. So really being able to be a bit of an open book and make those changes as you hear them. And obviously, Jen, you've taken that really fantastically in your own development, and that's clearly been a factor of your growth and success. Jack, to your question, look, I think in the next 5 years, one of the really critical aspects we're going to see is that that there's going to be a need and an expectation for farmers and producers and growers to actually really get on board with the tech movement, whether they're kind of early adopters or innovators or not. I think we're going to start to see things like markets and finance and regulation and government start to expect that there's really good on-farm practices around data collection and record keeping and those kind of expectations. And so if you haven't yet gotten an app like Spades, if you haven't yet got a record keeping piece of software, if you haven't yet started to collect and collate and analyze data on your farming operation, in the next 5 years, you really will have to. Otherwise, you'll start to lose out a bit in some of those areas where you might be having to respond to a higher authority or to market forces, or trying to get the best buck at the sale yards or the grain bin or whatever it may be. So I think in the next 5 years that rate of adoption will increase quite significantly, because quite truthfully, I think farmers are going to need to get on board if they haven't already, and start to really assess all those options that are out there.
Absolutely. Do you think, before we go, that policy will be a key driver in the next 5 years of getting this out to farms for uptake? Maybe you need the single dashboard to know what your weather's doing, your spraying, and also have that compliance all tied in. Do you think that would be a key driver? Might be a good comment from both of you as well.
Oh, for me, absolutely. I mean, I'm no compliance expert, but I think that's really heading the way that we're heading. I think there's going to be some significant amount of boxes to tick and red tape and things to be able to meet in the standards basis, and we're seeing this start to play out a little bit with compliance and regulatory requirements coming in on climate and environment and the practices you're taking on farm. And the way that you're, handling your livestock or handling your fertilizers or handling the land that you've got. I think we're really heading that way, and I think it's only going to increase. I think the other thing that's going to be a really big player is the consumer. We're chatting a little bit about horticulture industry, how it's a little bit closer to the consumer. As consumer expectations change, as their preferences change, as what they want to eat changes and how they want to eat it, that really feeds back to practices on farm quite quickly. And that can really start to drive how technology is adopted as well back there. So I think those two key factors are going to be really, really big drivers going forward.
Amazingly put. Jen, did you have anything to say about that for the key policy driving what farmers uptake?
Yeah, we're already seeing some regulations requiring electronic records be kept. Yep. So, I mean, maybe the day of the diary, notebook and pen is numbered. So, Matt's right. Like, I encourage anybody who's thinking of being an early adopter, who's been, toying with it in their mind, maybe it's suitable for them and they're capable and willing to take on these new solutions to do it, because it's to the benefit of everybody, because you'll see improvements made, and your fellow farmers will be really grateful to you because you've made a solution better.
Yeah, absolutely. A great way to sort of finish off and round off this episode on the Farmers2Founders series. Matt, Jen, thank you very much for coming on board today. And Jen, especially for you, for breaking down the barriers from adoption for farmers and what they're doing, but also having a little bit of insight into what Spades has gotten up to in the last 2 years. I think I've been chatting to you on and off throughout socials around that time as well. So it's great to see you come leaps and bounds and Spades forward.
Thanks, Jack. It's been great to finally catch up.
Thank you, Jack. Good to chat again.
This Farms Advice episode does not stop here. Come and join the conversation on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or TikTok, and even join our Facebook group. Go to farmsadvice.com.au for more on this episode and spread the hashtag FarmsAdvice to your mates. If you can leave a review on Apple or Spotify, that will let other farmers find us too. But until then, see you next Tuesday. In the spirit of reconciliation, the Farmers Advice podcast acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea, and community. We pay our respect to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people today.